I just need to ask Carl if he is going to the factory. I need to email them today with the numbers. But yeah, that's good. Well, the discussions will be whatever it is. It's a Monday, but it'll be really nice to update a little bit of the Eurostar connection here. Of course, that's cool. Oh, and here we are. Hey, Mark. We've got something so cool to show
Hi.
you, Mark. And it all ends up in a PDF. I said,
Great.
I'm not saying results ends up.
Sure.
Just looking at something here.
I mean, I'm tempted sometimes to just generate a PDF to see that excitement in your eyes. It doesn't have to be anything useful or practical, like just here is a new PDF.
Yeah.
It's so cool. All right.
And the other thing is also if it's if one's generating things, I can see that in a sense if you've generated say PDF or something else from something you had before, that doesn't mean in a later case if you decided you wanted something else instead of the PDF, you don't have all the bits you need. So it's no problem at all really either way.
Yeah. Yeah, we had Carl here. I had to kick him out because I restarted because Fabian and I had a 10-minute pre thing on. So, and here's Andrew. Yeah, we'll talk about whatever today, but it's just I went to Brussels on Friday, which was so easy. Oh my gosh, the whole train thing is so perfect.
Hmm.
So we had some chats and some builds and some things, and a few things came out that's kind of worth mentioning, I think. Just doing a little test here.
I haven't been on the channel tunnel for a bit, but I was just delighted in the fact as you were going through, and they then say we're now traveling X meters per second or miles per hour, and you'd listen to everyone trying to turn it into units they recognised, which was anything from walking speed to the sort of half the speed of light. Turns out most of us are not very good at mental math and unit transposition.
Yeah. Hang on. I don't want Fabian to know I've edited his paper with AI. Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, you're there. I just did a spell check on the first paragraph. Not a spell check, but some of the capitalization was wrong. Andrew, are you fully there or halfway there? There.
I'm present. My webcam's not working, so I'm digging around under my table trying to get the plugs to work. I think a USB port went out.
We've all heard that excuse. Uh, so I can relay my Saturday night experience briefly while we're waiting. I went to see the Chemical Brothers at the world's largest nightclub. I'll repeat that for Carl. Yeah, I was just while we're waiting for people, Carl. I was just mentioning on Saturday I went to see the Chemical Brothers in the world's largest nightclub in North London, Northolt, not Northolt. That's an airport, close to that, whatever. And 15,000 people at this venue, three insanely massive dance areas. It used to be an IKEA, so it's just a gutted IKEA basically. And a couple of things worth noting. One is, oh, there we see you, Andrew. Yeah, you found it. One thing that was interesting, they had a huge LED backdrop that was really, really, really wide and really good quality, very, very bright. Of course, it was all glitch art and that stuff because it was that kind of music. It wasn't very photorealistic, but it did do good colors. The frame rate was amazing. When things moved across, it was so smooth. But then there's a social aspect that I think is interesting for us media type people. There was two ladies dancing next to me, very happy, la la la, and they were taking a selfie. And it was a bit dark, obviously. So I just took the light on my camera and just shone it on their faces. Just, photographer, give them a bit of fill light. And they were very happy, blah, blah, blah. Talk to them later, nice people. And then I realized afterwards that was actually quite flirtatious in the sense that in the olden days, to talk to a lady, you might offer a light for a cigarette. So now we offer a light for a selfie. Right? I think it's interesting because to talk to people, very often it's nice to have a physical prop. Like if you're out in the park, a dog, right? I don't know how it relates to our virtual environment, but we do talk about waving hands feels odd. Sometimes we need something tangible to connect with. I thought it was quite amusing. Anyway, I don't know who's coming today, so Fabienne and I are going to show a little bit of what we did on Friday, and then we can talk about whatever. So let's just do some diving. Do we want to preface anything, Fabienne, or should I just show my end and then you show your end, and then we say the magic PDF word at the end?
I had a very awkward, also related anecdote, but I'm going to skip it. Just go with it.
I want to hear your anecdote. Well, I'm
After
drinking
the
coffee.
recording, of course.
And that's how we're going to save the world. Oh shit, we weren't recording. Right. Right. So hi, Rob. So today we're going to talk. We can talk about whatever, but for a few minutes, I'm going to show a little new thing in Author that's related to what Fabienne and I were working on Friday. Fabienne's going to show a little bit in extended reality, and yeah, enough talk. Let me just show you. Here is a paper by Fabienne. I go to export. I hope you can all see this. This is not finished, but it's close to finished. So one of the things is that if we're going to have an environment where you have kind of a thinking space, it's probably useful to have keywords, concepts, names, and all of that to use to draw things around in different ways, as we've discussed. But for people to write their own keywords, as Mark has pointed out, is usually bad if you look at ACM. Concepts is harder, names is just boring, abstract, forget about it. So if I click now AI suggest, it takes the document, sends it to ChatGPT, and it fills it in based on ChatGPT. So I think this is very, very useful because look, it's just text. So if there's something you don't like, you delete it. Like I've told ChatGPT, try not to have keywords and concepts, both of them. So I can just delete, add whatever. In the settings, I can make my own prompts for all of this. So let's say I have a specialism in some field. Even for the keywords or concepts, I can teach it a bit how to do that. So if I just copy this, okay, sorry, it's a bit small, this window, it's going to be bigger. Please notice here at the bottom, it says this abstract was generated by ChatGPT 4. It will have more information, including the date. We just haven't programmed this yet. Part of the deal is if I now delete this and edit it, or even if I don't, if I just like it and delete that, that's fine. Then it was created by a human because the human approved that version of it. So that's there. And then in a few seconds, again, this isn't finished, so it's a bit weird. I may have changed that actually. Let's just wait a second more. Oh, okay. Right, so here it is. Here's the normal export. It has the visual meta that we all know and love, I hope, or at least know. So you can see here that the keywords abstract, all of it is properly in here. So let's export in a slightly different way. I'll do AI suggest again. And then down here, also export JSON file. That's where the fun is. So we export, and the way it is now, it's not ideal because the user wouldn't know, come back and wait a few seconds and then do the JSON, but don't worry, we're fixing it. There it is. Click save. So now we have this thing that you saw, all that stuff, and then on the desktop, messy desktop, we have the JSON. Open that, and it has all that good stuff. It's got the normal visual meta, the headings, the self-citation. So it says it's me who's the author now, but don't worry, Fabienne, that's just because there's only a single thing. As you can see down here, it says you're the author of the section. It's got the names, concepts, abstract, all of that ready for Fabienne to receive. So before we go over to Fabienne, how freaking cool was that? Isn't that cool that we have available these things? I mean, if ChatGPT is good or bad, to a point it doesn't matter because the human should go through it. So it's purely a bit of a help. It is not the deciding factor, right? So while Fabienne gets ready, Fabienne, can I say the email and the three-letter acronym thing? Do you mind?
Go for it.
Okay, this is so exciting. So when you go into Fabienne's XR environment in the great Vancouver, Washington, you will be asked to enter your email address because we're testing, we want feedback from people and all of that good stuff, right? And then you do the beautiful things he's going to show you now, including annotating whether you like a document or not. And the way you can do the annotating can be quite cool. Take your headset off and automatically you will get an email, PDF, listing the documents you liked with links to local files. So if this is your work corpus, in that email with that PDF, no matter what operating system, no matter what software, click on those links, it'll open the local files instantly for you. Probably the coolest thing in the world. Right. Any questions before we hand over to Brussels? Obviously, JSON and all of these good things will be sent around as well. The PDF is just an extremely open way to make it extremely accessible to do some work in XR and have the results with you. Fabienne, over to you.
Yeah, so we'll see what actually happens there. There is a plan, but not everything goes according to plan. So there will be an objective. You will probably get some data, probably related to the things you will be doing in XR, but exactly the form it will take, it will hopefully be a useful one. So just put little asterisk compared to the official announcement just before. So I will still try to show you some of the progress based on the discussion we had last Friday. So let me, yes, it's a single time sharing, so I need to not mess it up. So please let me know. We can't hear you if you're talking to us from.
If you go full screen and do a few things, can I just interject something?
Okay. Go for it.
Yeah, obviously don't stop your sharing or whatever. I'll stop talking about it.
I didn't click, so we'll see.
So basically, this world is essentially a bunch of JSON documents or JSON strings. We're trying to keep it really simple because it's obviously very important to integrate with what Andrew is doing. And it is taking the approach of each object is kind of like an icon. Whether you have access to what's inside or not really depends on what. If it's a simple text string, of course, if there's some fancy, expensive 3D things, no, but you have a preview for it. And it cannot be tested with a vision because it doesn't allow for proper AR in WebXR, as I think you all know. Okay, back to you, Fabian.
Right, actually, so let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes.
Yes, great. So I need to give a little update because some of the things you mentioned, I'm not sure were shared. There is an image. Well, first of all, I put a floor. It's a bit of a detail, but in VR in AR it doesn't make sense. You have your real floor, but in VR, I put kind of a grid of fading gray, so something that is not too shocking. And I think also when it's going to be a bit fast, but when it's all black initially, it looks whitish. So I think in two at least pretty strong condition, it helps ground a bit. I think for most of us who are familiar with XR, it's not needed. But for people which it might be a first time, like the gray void, it's kind of scary. So here there is a bit of, I hope subtle enough that it doesn't pull away from the experience, but grounding still.
Fabian,
just a little bit, yeah.
If you don't mind, I would just like to add that for what Andrew has built with the Dini design with the gray space, because it's seated based, because it's 360, there isn't such an issue with the floor. But because this is primarily to be used in AR and also with VR if it's safe, that's why it makes a very big difference to have a floor, right?
So let me show you actually with the video, then I think that will be, let me know if the frame rate is bad, but I think it's important then for the AR version that people can see this. Can you see the video? Oh, is it okay? Frame rate or?
Little choppy, but just fine.
Okay. So yeah, here is the AR version. So I'm behind my desk, and the icons, again, they were basically this, namely the content of a dedicated directory on my computer. For the technical people also in the room, I made a virtual version, let's say, of this, which relies on Docker containers, so that it's possible to have something like this on the internet, not just purely local. In such cases, you can rely on a Dropbox, for example, in order to share files, but it's the same principle. So yes, the files, you will see the icons are real in the sense that they are not just looking like icons of a file system, they are those files with their content in it. And I think it's important to clarify this because we're not used to files with XR. We're usually used to apps, and the apps manage the files. But here again, the point is the real files. So you can open them. So here I open the PDF, which has been behind or under the hood converted. And on the right, you can see some extracted data, namely the, I'll just go back a second. You can see the images there on the right. And what I did, so the PDF has a couple of functions here, which is next page, previous page, close the document, but also clone the current page. So that's why when I pinch, here I have a page in the background. They're the two same pages, but the one on the back, you can imagine like, oh, I'm only interested in page 5. So I put page 5 wherever else, and I keep the document open. So I go to the next pages. Some have images, and all those images, if you are on the current page, they are in full, let's say. And if it's from another page, they are in half opacity or lower opacity. So the icons can be moved around, and again, so I'll pause it. Because they represent file, we can do things to the content. So here I dropped the PDF on the white area there. When I dropped it, it became red to confirm that it was close enough or within that area so that something will happen. And I have the console to clarify that is indeed happening. It takes a bit of time, so I move to other things like previous page, next page. I can close again the document, and that moves on. The special files, the one with the little black spheres on top of them, they are layout files. So they don't have any content in them except where to put things. So they have the position and rotation of other things. So for example, post-it notes. So I left pinch to open document, and here it loaded another post-it note at about the same location, just to show that, yeah, it has an impact. And there are special, so they also, the icon drop to the table. It's roughly aligned with my desk. And I drop it so that it's like position. The icons also have two states. One is being picked, hence the plate it's on is becoming full, and if I release it, it's going to become a wireframe again. It's just to show different status, basically picked versus not picked. So yeah, grabbing another icon, showing the same. It's like opening the document, closing the viewer for that document. What I will then show is how to bring that document. Again, my goal here is not to show you that you can read in XR. I think it's interesting. I'll go on first. This one is another layout file, but this layout has, instead of having documents, it has 3D models. So I'm basically inside a little 3D world. I was in a 3D world before, but that 3D world has another like set of assets, which instead of being just quote unquote documents like PDF and all that, it has 3D models like the like walls of a house or whatever you want it to be or whatever you have available. And there are again files, those GLB, those 3D models are files on my file system. There are nothing special except there are 3D models. So again, I drop the document and then you will see the device on my desk, the remarkable, but could be another device. I'm going to show this after. Receive the files, is restarting its interface in order to take into account the document. Can put the file back. So just to prove you it's the same, so I could open the document. I search for it on the other device, now that it has been copied.
Fabien, I'm not sure if that was clear in the video, so I'll just say it. What Fabien did was just like he could drop a document to places, he dropped it onto the representation of the remarkable and it moved the file itself to the remarkable, so that's why he's holding it up now. How amazingly sci-fi freaking perfect is that? Yeah, it's just really, really good.
So that's where we were at. Basically, I think Wednesday.
Don't stop sharing. Don't stop sharing.
No, well, I have more things to show, so I don't.
Okay, good.
So 2 things since then. So you can see it's the same thing. They need a document open. There is a grid now at the bottom. There is the dropping area here on the left. One thing that was interesting, like a remark from Freud, was like, okay, but the remarkable, not everybody has a remarkable, and maybe somebody who comes to the event have a laptop or an iPad or something like this, but they still will say, okay, that's the document I'm interested in. Once I leave VR, AR, I want to read that document, and we don't have the budget to offer a remarkable person and don't want to give mine away. So his suggestion was like, okay, how do I get the content? So I'm going to try to share this now. So I'll hide your faces. Yeah, I don't want to bring the other laptop. So what I did is I opened another browser window. You can imagine here the Chrome on the left is on another laptop, device, iPad, whatever, but on the same Wi-Fi because it needs to see the server for the companion, basically. And what I can do there is basically this new function called share directly to connected clients, not very original. And if I do enter, this clients receive the file. Normally what it should do, yeah, I guess I don't have the right permission for, yes, it's a pop-up. I accept it. I'll do it again. Voilà. So I get the PDF right there, accessible. And the person who, let's say, moved around those icons, you can imagine here the area to drop it. Oh, of course, this thing on the left could look like something else, or a tray, or a laptop, or an iPad, or something else, like to look a bit closer. And when you drop on it, then the same thing happens, namely that you receive a link here. You could also have the times when you received or whatever, but you basically have it. And it's open by the computer of the person using it. Again, here I'm using the same one because it's easier for me. So if I were to take that document, open it again. Oh. Yeah, of course. Voilà. It doesn't take the SVG. Voilà. So again, that's just the document itself, but it means the person, once they have manipulated documents through that icon in XR, the content is not stuck in XR. That's the main point. Does it make sense?
Makes a lot of sense. Please don't stop sharing. Can I explain something of what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I went to Brussels and we had a wonderful coffee, wonderful lunch, and then being in the same room really is better, which of course speaks to our whole VR work thing. So what you see here in the center screen, Fabien has taken his desktop layout and put it up against the wall. So that's
initially, sorry, just to compare with where we were just a few minutes ago. Initially, it was like so.
Yeah.
And now...
So the exciting thing about the kind of JSON stuff we're using here and the kind of spatiality that has been developed, it means that while we're standing in Fabien's living room, we're thinking of maybe one wall could be, for instance, all the articles from our book, first 2 pages or single page, whatever. You move them around. But if you want to have some kind of spatiality, go to the other side of the room and, you know, literally, like you could see, drag it across the room. Fabien suggested maybe a corner so that you don't walk across the room. And then you can start doing kind of a TV murder wall, putting these objects up there, and they're all understood what it is. And the room itself is, of course, another storable, recordable object. So this is where it gets really, really exciting, because the notion of kind of nesting these things and using links, I really have no problem with linking to Andrew's system through a link in here and vice versa. There's nothing wrong with going out to a web browser. To have these nicer transitions is, of course, beautiful. If we were making a movie, we would do that. But yeah, it is just a very powerful experience. I have 2 things to add to this after you're done sharing, Fabien, so please continue.
Yeah. So the other things, so I think honestly, just having a web client in order to bring the content out is I don't know if it's an elegant solution, but it's definitely an easy one. So I think just for that, it was quite worthwhile. And again, it can be like unfolded with more things to it, like metadata about when the event was shared. We can also imagine filtering. So when you go to that page, if I go back, it's literally a white page now until something happened, which is a bit maybe too minimalist, arguably. So I'm opening here another browser, but you see the same result. And one could imagine also having an input box to say, hey, this is Fabien, and thus here it would be shared only to Fabien, or like a group of people, and then they all receive it. It's really, I think, quite a bit can be done with that. And yeah, finally, the last thing, which I'm not sure how I can even demonstrate that in video, is there is something called WebXR layers. And what those layers do, yeah, I hope there is like yeah, there is not a lot, there is no explanation. So I'll just say it aloud, and you'll have to believe me that it works. It's basically, I think that's the full screen mode. The viewer has, on desktop, it doesn't change anything. But basically, in XR, that page became a layer, and it means everything that is in front of it is gone. You don't see the icon anymore. Even if you put your hands, they are gone also. They are behind the document. So the document is not just on the foreground and hides everything else. It's also rendered in a higher resolution fashion. So that means you can enjoy basically text as if it was, it's not true what I'm saying, but it's an analogy. You can imagine the resolution is twice higher, which again, for textures in video games, like icons like this, it doesn't matter much. But for things like this, namely documents, if you can have a higher resolution version, which is also, here you see I have the same document, the original one, the rendered one, and then the higher resolution rendered one, you will, basically it's much nicer to read. So that's something I can't really easily show you because you need to be in the headset itself to see the difference. But imagine like a twice higher resolution when you're in XR, and no noise, because basically only the document remains, all the icons, your hands, etc. disappear. But I'll put a link also so that you can share at some point. And if you have any suggestion on how to, maybe a screen recording, I'll try to show a screen recording from the headset viewpoint with layered enable and disabled, or even side by side, I guess I could show. Yeah, imagine higher resolution, which for text is so important.
Yeah, layers are that's an amazing demo. Just so much there. It's really, really exciting. As to an explanation of layers, it's a mode to bypass the WebXR renderer and say to the underlying system, if you have a more efficient way of rendering this, then please do. So Quest has invested heavily in it. Apple has not. But it's a way where if you know there's a thing, and in particular if it's changing, so one of the main uses for it is for videos, because if you have a video texture in WebGL, particularly 3 and stuff like that, then you need to be constantly re-uploading that texture and moving it around in memory a number of times. Whereas by saying, I don't really care what you do with this as long as this gets to the screen at the highest resolution possible, is a directive that the Layers API has the ability to make use of for high resolution simple projections like a planar projection of a video or a very high resolution raster image.
I see comments here, including from Andrew, talking about this being a working ecosystem. It really is getting there, and I'm so glad that we are really focusing on just using JSON, because in some way, I mean, do you remember the ending of the movie Kingdom of Heaven? What is the value and meaning of Jerusalem? Nothing. Everything. It's the same with JSON in our context. It is almost nothing, but it can be everything. And it's super open and clear. It makes me very, very happy. Fabian, please.
Yeah, two couple of things, I guess. One, I did not show it there, and maybe it's not clear, but so you have those little icons with the sphere, the black sphere on it that represents layouts. So again, they don't have content, they just have the position and rotation and scale. And I guess a couple of attributes, optional attributes on where the rest of the content is in space. They don't have, like, it's not images or PDF. They say this image goes there, right? So you imagine manipulating objects in space, and then you can save it. So basically it goes back to the companion, the server's like, hey, here is the new layout. And then you can send that layout wherever you want. As long as people have access to the file, they will be back wherever you want. So because the last time I think we had a discussion on layouts and view spec also, that was not implemented yet. Namely that you had JSON for layouts, but you could just at some point say, hey, that's actually a nice layout. I want to keep it. You would have to manually basically do it. Whereas now it's just you left pinch on that instruction. Actually, it's clarified, and then you get the JSON for where the things are in space. One quick also detail I wanted to share is because Andrew, you mentioned ecosystem. One thing that was cool, I think it was yesterday evening before going to bed, on the Remarkable Pro, because now it has colors, I put comics on them. I really love comics. I don't know if you recommend it because the colors are, I mean, still e-ink. So if you're a fan of colors and a fan of comics, I mean, it's a couple of years too early, but still, it's wow, it's cool. Getting the comics in there is cool. And why I want to share is that instead of doing what I would do until last week, basically, normally I would go into the command line. I would convert the EPUB to PDF. I would crop the resulting PDF to trim the margins. And then I would SCP the file to the Remarkable, and then I would add the file to say, hey, there is a new PDF on the Remarkable. It's not super complicated, especially if you've done it once, a couple of commands, and that's it. What I did yesterday evening before going to bed is I took the EPUB, I dropped it on the directory, and that was it. So there is no XR related to this. There is no headset involved in it. But in terms of ecosystem, or in terms of capability to basically monitor a file system and care about real files, I mean, it sounds a bit boring, but it basically works. It enables, I think, a lot of usages. Yes, I'm excited about the usages with XR, but I think it's, I mean, I know it's much more generalist than this, and I think in itself, having a couple of monitor directory where they cascade transformation or conversion to adapt to the target device, let's say the Remarkable or VR headset, I think it's Yeah, it's a pattern that works well. So I suggest to everyone to consider this. And I think if you want to do other things, for example, like convert your web file to MP3 or to transcribe the files so that you get metadata, like what is the text in those audio files, extract for video, same previews, or have audio from. I mean, there is so much that can be done there to get extra metadata with all this content. Again, regardless of or helpful to the target device you're going to file those things to. So I think it's ecosystem, I don't know, but at least a useful pattern, I guess.
Quite the expensive demo there. You had me looking at the remarkable, but it's a lot of money. So, sorry, go
Actually,
ahead.
can I share something very briefly? It's not nearly as deep or interesting, but it it got me to thinking that something that I did. It's not actually very clever, but it's I think interesting in the context of what Fabian has done as a sort of a supplement to it. Um, Recently, I got the distant early warning cards from Andrew McLuhan, and I was wanting to play with them to have something to do to kind of show them off. And so here's the pack of cards. That's the law of average will clobber you every time. And I just built a really simple thing for being able to pass the cards from one hand to another, and to be able to kind of create a pleasing arc or pattern and things like that. And then I don't know if I get it over the table in this, but they cast shadows on each other and on the table, and it's really nice. And the sort of that card size iconic representation that it sort of constitutes seems really sort of broadly analogous to what a system like Fabian's needs. And so I thought it was a really interesting metaphorical thing to be able to pursue, is sort of note card size things, and the idea of stacks and constraints and other things like that. So, I think I'll build something that allows you to hold a set of cards out and to fan them and other things like that. And yeah, so it could be there's the sort of the visualization aspect, uh, uh, further beyond what you've got there, Fabian.
Very, very cool. Fabian?
Yeah, quickly, at the risk of sounding too deep, I think when I show the video where Brendel shows this, I think a lot of people will probably nod or say, okay, yeah, I understand, it makes sense. But I want to argue that it's not the same as either throwing the cards or picking the icon. The action of doing it, the gesture, I don't know, it's like you're grabbing an icon. It's strange. It's nice. I think it's nice. It would be even nicer if there would be like tactile feedback or everything, but it's still like you're grabbing a thing that was until now an abstraction and you're really grabbing it. It's still virtual. Like again, you don't touch actually the icon, you don't touch the cards, but you still like manipulating them one to one. They are in place when you drop them. They are there where you expect them to be. And that very action, I'm trying to say that watching the video of it or hearing us describe it is not fair. It's not the same as actually doing it, regardless of how we feel if it's efficient or not, or it's you grabbing an abstraction that was until now it was like a concept or something. It's not the same as clicking on a document on the desktop and moving it around, or the icon of a document representing its content on the desktop. It's not the same as grabbing it. So I think it's important, again, like as we discussed here through screens, for people who would watch such a video and think, oh yeah, I get it. If you haven't actually done it, you probably get it conceptually, but it's not the same.
Well, there's one thing we can do. Andrew has really worked hard and made a very good laser interaction, and it has to be laser interaction because it is action at a distance, right? But when we started doing the hand menu, and I know right now it doesn't work by fully touching, we have to cheat because of the limitation of the technology. the origin of the idea with the hand menu is you touch your own body. So there is some haptics going on. And of course, you have your sense of place. But when you pinch something in VR space, you are touching something. You're touching your own fingers. And that really is something. So the magic of taking an idea and doing this,
Yeah.
really lovely. So yeah, I just wanted to add to that, Fabian. And then I have something to show, but Brandel, please go.
I don't have anything more to show, but I wanted to reiterate what I think Fabian was saying. Except I'm distracted with mortgage stuff at this point. Is that it the basic fact of programming an object and the sheer near tangibility of it, and I take Fabian's point as well that it is not yet fully tangible, but you're just willing a set of abstractions into such clear existence, and it has properties, and it has behaviors, and it has dynamics, and it's an incredibly surreal experience because a lot of people will say that programming is magic, but this comes so much closer in terms of what it is you're creating, and the implications will have not landed for most programmers unless they have worked not just on VR, but on the construction of artifacts, particularly ones that already have external significance, and the sort of the basic and more importantly sort of general manipulation thereof. When you build a game, it's like there's some of it in there, but because it's an underpinning like game system. But the more generalized the system is, the more profound that impression is to my mind.
Cool, right. So I consider author and reader client applications to this environment because to me, as I've said in my piece in the book, which isn't ready yet, I really do believe that in the near future, everything will be dimensional and we will think of 2D versions as being flattened. Sometimes that's great. That's all you need, a flattened document, but it will be considered that. So I'm going to share something briefly. This is something that isn't built yet, but it is based on something. Please scream if you can't see. So here I have this randomly brilliant paper, and I want to cite it, but I'm not going to select any text. I'm just going to do citation. So I do Control-click, copy to cite, or Command-Shift-C. You've all seen this many times, but there's a point to it. So I paste this here, and let me go back and just close that down. And as you've also seen, it appears now with the author names and the date, right? So this down here is relatively new. That's important for the next stage. There is an open button. The reason for the open button is because of this. It knows the name of the file, which of course the user could be silly and change, right? But they know. So if I click on the open button, surprise, surprise, it opens the original document. It is a very, very simple thing. It is, of course, not robust because of what I said. They can't change it. But it can be really important because if you download from an academic repository and so on, chances are it will be a unique string of numbers or names or whatever, right? So I'm showing you this because the insane thing that Fabien showed me on Friday that we all saw now, he's shown it before, but to see it in person, it was very different. Made me really go back and look at the map feature in Author, because there's something obviously powerful with any kind of a map view, no matter where it is. And that's why I'm going to move the Zoom thing out of the way. That's why I refer to this as being a client application. So a few things to tell you first. Under the View menu in Author, we currently have a journal, ideas, and research notes. They're just normal Author documents, but they're hidden away so you don't delete them by accident. Research notes is useful because you can keep pasting these citations in there, click to get back to the original. That's why that exists. What I plan to do now is add one thing below here, which is Open Master Map, which is another normal Author document, but the focus really is on this view. Currently, as I think you know, this is based on defined concepts, which is great for certain use cases. I'm very happy users like it and so on. But I'm going to change two things. One is note and one is document. So if you add a note, that is supposed to help you with things like just large pieces of text you don't know where to place. So you can put that in here. But if you do it, let me just get out of this. If I now take this piece, this is actually a live document, so I don't want to destroy it. So I copy it. So I cut it, I cut it here. If I now go to the map and I paste it, it does this. And it's really computationally expensive for my programmers to make this wrap and so on. So that's not going to happen. And even if it did wrap, we have the issue that useful blocks of text are quite large often. So that is why the notion is that if you have a note, you have it in here, but instead of calling it something fancy like a person or a location and all of that, you call it a note and it means something. One of the things it means is when you export this, you can choose not to have notes added to the glossary. So this is designing by removing stuff. I think that's quite important. That means you can have a free form on a 27-inch screen, all kinds of things, but your glossary is not going to be messed up with the fact that you had some notes on here, right? And please also consider that this already exports to JSON canvas. So how to integrate this with what Fabian has built and what Andrew's working on is the whole point of showing this. The second aspect of this that I'm trying to add, this was all designed over the weekend, is this one. If you choose, this is a document rather than a note or a person or something, you get this extra field here with a file name. If that is not filled in, you click the open button, you find the file and the name of it's listed. Once that is done, you click the open button again, it will open that file. That's why I showed you open citation earlier. It's exactly the same thing, but it opens an author document or another document rather than a PDF. That makes sense, right? So a note is stripped down. Forget the stuff at the bottom here. That was another test. So that means ideally that all of these things, depending on what they are, let's say this is a location that'll show up as bold. We can have subtle visual differences. If something is a person, then they show up as italic, as I think you've seen, because italic looks like a signature. And here's a basic example of a relationship, right? So that means that you can have a master map here where you can choose to link all your other documents and maps from this view. So that means that this becomes your desktop for all your writing, if you're writing with author, but case in point. Because that's always been my design problem. If you have some kind of a cool view like this, how do you connect to other things? So this is the simplest way to do that. So the hope is to have a clean connection with this into XR so that I can work on the go, and this can be an entire wall, put on the headset, and there it is. Nothing is new here. We've been talking about this for over a year conceptually, but a few pieces now put it together. The last piece that really made it work was we already have a basic mechanism to link to open a PDF. Why not just also have it possible to open another author document? That means you can nest as much as you want of these maps, which I think is just so important. And if we do this approach, then we can build different clients of this over the next year. And we can really look at the user interactions. For instance, how are you going to visually show that this bit of text is a link to another map? I don't know how to do yet. Maybe it'll just be underlined text because it's kind of linked. I don't know. But those things, so it just really feels nice and smooth and natural, is going to be interesting. Also, I think this is what you asked me for just now, Fabian. I'm going to share again. Fabian, did you ask me what I showed earlier, that kind of export thing? Okay, yes. I'll do that. Also, Brandel, this is nice to show you. Hang on, just want to remove some nonsense. Right, so this is a new thing that I'm just so excited about. Okay, so this works, and this is what we played with on Thursday. It's based on the premise that it's really useful if you have a big visual environment to have keywords, concepts, names, and all of that stuff. But authors are usually too lazy and stupid in the sense they're too deep in their own work to do sensible keywords. Just look at ACM keywords. So what do? Do we give it to AI? No, of course we don't. But if you click here, we have ChatGPT doing AI suggest. And this is plain text. So now hang on, we don't need this here. You just edit it. Here is the abstract. This window is too small. It's going to be 7 lines tall. So I don't want people to have an excuse not to have read their own abstract. And of course, at the end of the abstract, it says generated by ChatGPT 4. It'll also have the date, which we just haven't added yet because the prompt cannot give you the date. November 2023 is the latest ChatGPT knows exist in the world. So my perspective, and this is entirely up for discussion, is that if the user manually deletes that, I would say they have approved of this abstract. So now there's no real need to label it as AI. That's up for discussion again in our community. I want this to be big so they do edit it. If there's something that doesn't reflect what they're saying, that's fine. But the final thing here, and this is the new thing I think for you, Brandel, if you look at the bottom of the screen, it also exports a JSON sidecar file. So if I now click export, I'll put that on the desktop, and this is still in test mode. It's only existed since Friday. And I go back here. In a few seconds, it should ask me to export again. It's actually a bit weird, but there we go. Yeah, here you go. So now it asks me to do it again. Obviously not at best user interaction, but the point is, if we now go to the desktop, we have the PDF as expected with the glossary, references, and the visual meta where all of these, the abstract, all of it is in here. But then we have this fun little guy. This is the JSON of all that metadata. So the glossary is in here. The dynamic view, which is the map, will also be in here with the layout. The names are in here, which are really good for searching and seeing who was talking about what. Self-citation, all that stuff. That's what you mentioned, right, Fabian?
Indeed.
Did you want to comment on this and how it relates to our glorious future?
I wanted to show something about it.
Oh, well, even better. I will stop sharing then. Any questions on that? Oh, come on. Got to be a question. Right. Okay. Fabian, over to you.
I mean, it's not a question, it's a suggestion. It's in the paper or the article that I submitted for the book, which is to say, if you use ChatGPT or whatever model, doesn't matter, please consider setting it in somewhere. I don't care. Can actually be in the JSON file, can be in the text itself, but say, hey, that was a query to whatever version of whatever model on whatever date, to try to make it slightly more reproducible. So that's my suggestion on this. I will share my screen again. So
on that, how to say what is AI and all of that is really going to be an important part of what we're doing. I saw a piece today on how something like 20% of Wikipedia now is AI generated, absolutely crazy. So if we don't know what's AI generated, we will have what Jaron Lanier talked about, and now many other people talking about AI feeding AI and going into just nothingness. No, we agree.
Right. I sent the article to you this afternoon so that I don't have to argue every time. So I will invite everybody whenever the book is published. I'll point toward it every time. This way, that will make my.
There should be a preview for you all on Wednesday, I hope.
Great, and then an XR preview soon. Then, so to go back to the content that you just shared, the idea being, of course, that it's a file, and if it's a file, So if I load a document here, I'll make it much bigger. I load that document, you can see here behind, and then on the left, the little post-it note is related to, I'll show you the console, and that's where the interesting stuff happens. The visual meta and all the metadata, including the generated abstract or the abstract, whatever it is, if it's been edited by the author or not, with the concept. So everything that Flo just shown that was filled, because it's just a JSON and that JSON is just a file, what basically is happening is if I go there, I have the file name of the document we just tried to open, and it tried to get the high resolution version, doesn't have it, use the low resolution version, first page, and then it tries, if there is, to get the visual meta.json file. And if there is, then you get all those metadata on top. Here it just symbolically with the post-it note next to the document, but you could use those, for example, concept to show links to other documents that share the same concept or multiple concepts or whatever you want. But the point is, by the very fact of it being both a file and a JSON one with a predictable file name, so a pattern basically for it, you can get a lot of this for not for free, but basically like very little was done in order to integrate this kind of content in this kind of environment.
Don't stop sharing. Don't stop sharing.
Oh,
Thank you. Just to add to what Fabian is saying, I am not proposing on my side of the fence here that we have, VR interactions as a keyword on the wall. Of course, you can have that if you want to, but more likely the user, us, will chunk these. So the little label might say computer pioneers. And within that is a lot of keywords, Doug, Ted, blah, 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 and so on, right? So that gets interesting. And because Fabienne has this absolutely genius thing of having layouts, meaning, of course, view specs as separate things which don't have any content up by themselves, that means that we can start playing with that notion of having, you tap on something in the room and everything that has a certain concept associated with it can now be highlighted, move forward, whatever the heck it is. So I just think it's amazing what Fabian has made for an infrastructure. And I think it's amazing that we have ChatGPT and other LLMs that can help us with the metadata, provided, and thank you, Mark, you really hammered this into my head last week, provided it's presented in a way that the user, the author, has to approve. It's not just automatically there, it's not hidden. So all of these things coming together is just absolutely quite lovely. So yeah, I think that's quite fun. And that was an hour. Okay, an hour. What else are we going to talk about? Let me just throw something out there. We talked while we were on non-record. Oh no, okay. Mark, please go.
I was just going to say it's been really interesting. I'll pick my words carefully because actually what I'm saying, I think I'm saying this is a good thing, is I'm seeing this get closer and closer to, because in response to your request, I'm writing an article about spatial hypertext. And in a sense, this is looking more and more like Story Space from 1987. And that might sound a weird analogy to make, but essentially it's getting back to the fact that instead of the document as we normally experience it being the thing we wrote in the portrait rectangle on the screen, it's the sum of all the stuff that's in the file. And also being able to see things in modular form, because when you first put a map into Author back in, I don't know, 2017 or something, I actually thought that's what you were doing. It's sort of gone off in a direction and come back down. And the joint now is thinking about things being notes. They're just bits of information in there. They might be part of your narrative. They might never be part of your narrative, but they are information in the document. And so they are part of all that metadata. where I think that's really interesting is it gets us out of this bind of thinking, well, where and how and why do I add metadata to something I'm doing? Because if you think of it from a hypertextual sense, it's already there. You had all this stuff. I mean, another way of thinking of it for those who've seen Scrivener is, you have stuff on an outline, but it's too easy to get caught up on the sort of as well the visualization of how stuff's stored. If you just think of it as a great big gram bag, it's the room of requirements. It's there for you when you need it. It's as big as it needs to be, and it's got all the stuff. You put in what you need, and you make the sense of it. And that is quite a change. It's quite a cultural change from where we've been over 500 years or something. And that's an interesting thing. And where it ties together nicely is what Fabienne's just shown us, because I find myself thinking, okay, it's a bit of a stretch, but in a sense, I'm looking at an extension to Windows Explorer or Finder or whatever in an AR sort of sense. And I think that's useful and positive for where things are going. It's not, the demo is not trying to be all those things, and that would make it too complex anyway at the moment. But I just think it's really interesting starting to think, okay, how do I, the human in this, move stuff around? Because I find myself when looking at these, there are always two channels in my thought. One is, what's the technology? Because, like the bridge, the engineering has to work or the bridge falls down. So that's non-trivial. But also, does the technology work in a way that I understand as a human? Because one of the things that's so powerful about us is our associative thinking, which is one thing we haven't yet really managed to reproduce in software terms. And so having these loose maps, for want of a better term, these spaces where we essentially put things where they need to be. We don't need to worry about why they're there. We put them there because they don't need to be somewhere else. And our brains tend to cope with that quite well. I mean, obviously, if I look at somebody else's map, it may not immediately mean something, but nonetheless, for us as an individual consumer of it, it goes where it needs to be. If we need to share it with someone, we might need to actually give a little more attention to signaling our thought process. But anyway, so I just find it really exciting to sort of see all these things coming together. So thank you, everybody.
Such perfect comments, Mark. Oh God! First of all, the way these things might relate will be really, really important, because sometimes you do need a linear narrative, even if things are all over the place. Absolutely crucially important. And also, I'm hoping that now that we have the basics of at least this round of testing, next year the authoring will be on the shapes of these things. Right? Considering that we have shared communities, and at least for our sense, I think all of us will always have the future of text books as one of the things it's expected we will have, because they're like 200 megabytes of pictures in them and stuff, right? So that means we can deal with those citations. So Mark and I had to deal with a submission to the book today by someone who did the layout in Word and had a very different view than I did of certain layout things, and I went back and forth and it was quite difficult. And one of the things that I noticed is this submission didn't take into account the way that author happens to handle the metadata. If the submission went in as is, none of the things we just showed could happen. And also one thing we have to look at now is we probably need to export each single article separately so that there's a JSON and an analysis for each article. We have to look at the bindings. So this very much goes back to what Mark has been talking about in the sense of no longer authoring for a flat document. It's hard to do. Okay, Mark, I will out you in a joking way of when you asked me today how you could get your citations into author. And I had to remind you something that you really helped me invent, which is in your reference manager, you just copy the BibTeX and paste it in author and it will resolve. Right? It's not an obvious thing, but we're moving towards more text being live, interpreted, smart, whatever we want to call it. So that's fun. But now we also have to move into thinking this will be, well, first of all, the quote unquote library level is what we looked at here. The next thing we will start to do, which I think will be harder, is how do you do it for the individual document? And now that we have this amazing Fabienne work, we can actually start trying it rather than just talking about it. And talking about it, I think I should let Fabienne do the talking about it.
Yes. It's just a note. I at some point felt so. First, why can't you play with it right now? You can if I put the Dockerized version. What because it's my file system, I don't want to share it with the world. It's as simple as this. The Dockerized version can be installed on my server or anybody's server. And if you have, let's say, a cloud-based file system, for example, Dropbox, you could share file there. It's a bit of a mess still, kind of works, but it's not stable, and why it's not like super documented. So yes, the point is not to just do demo, is that anybody can play with it. I do have the hopes to do it in person in a couple of weeks or days now, even at the symposium, because then also it's ironing out a lot of bugs and feedback. It's safer. Now on Mark's remark with the file system, or the file browser, to be honest with you all, I did hesitate to show it, not because of any deeper reason, that I'm a little bit afraid that as soon as people see icons, they're like, oh, it's a browser, it's a file browser. And it's kind of the other way around, like the file browser happened to be there because the rest works, like taking a file first approach work in the sense that it gave me a lot of possibilities, like, oh, I could do this, I could do that, I can have a layout file, and then everything then goes into the right position. And then I was like, well, I'm manipulating the content of those files, and icons make sense, so I guess we'll have a file browser. But the file browser itself has never been the goal. It's just like it makes sense now that the icons or the content of the files through the file name can be manipulated. And because I think the whole point of XR is that you can, again, manipulate things, then it makes sense, in my opinion, to have a file browser. But it's not like, oh, let's have a file browser to have a file browser, or let's say it kind of surprised me, because I had a discussion with a friend, I want to say 4 or 5 years ago, about designing a file browser. So of course, when he saw a couple of files, he was hyped, he was excited. It's like, oh, you should do this and this and this. And he's a nice guy and a smart one, so I did follow his advice. But it was, again, the consequence of putting files first as a kind of paradigm or way to make a lot of the things we discussed often work. It was never the point of having it. I'm not criticizing file browser per se. It's not bad. I mean, all of us, I guess, use them on a pretty much daily basis. It became a consequence of. It's like it was enabled by the rest. It wasn't the goal per se of making that.
So now I'm going to go against everything you just said, Fabian, which I think is actually what you're doing too. I think we need to get away from the language of file browser documents and viewers and all of that stuff. Of course, it is the reality of what we're dealing with, but we're kind of moving, like with author now. I have either people saying, oh, it's very nice, or I have someone saying, how do I make a new document? They don't understand Command N or going up into the file because they come from the phone world, fair enough. So there is even older paradigms that some of us nerds like. But at this point, we really talk about objects and sculptures or structures or volumes, something like that. Because I think there is so much loaded baggage. Because when you were talking, Fabian, about when you open it into a file viewer, I don't want to hear that crap. I'm making the icon bigger, right? For me, it should be a more liquid information environment, to go back to my 90s philosophy. So it's really fun to have these language discussions in our community to see where it goes. I think you agree with that, Fabian. I'm just framing in a different way, right? Or are you ready to punch the screen at me or something?
Not punch the screen, but I really think files per se are important.
Okay.
And yeah, go for it.
No. Documents. The word file is weird because that actually means folder as well, doesn't it?
Directories. Because folder is Windows specific, historically speaking, at least.
Fabian, I do agree, and I'm very much for the containment, which is why I even don't want to let go of PDF, right? So having a file and not just a stream, not just a database, and not just something like Google Docs that is forever changeable, I agree with. I just also wanted to mention real quick before Mark here, we talked briefly, some of us last week, about Andrew and Rob being the prime users next year. It'll have to be slightly modified with the notion that Sloan expects us to continue with academic users to augment, right? You're both academic in the sense of knowledge work, which is good. We just need to keep that in mind, because I think it's really, really beneficial, especially with you, Andrew, to have your ownership as a user, not just as a creator for this. So the way that you organize your projects, I can't see that being all that different from how an academic may organize their life as well. So for you to pull into what you want direction, I think will be very healthy for us. I just needed to do a little bit of a, yeah, we have to do academics for year 2 as well. Not that there's bad, just to highlight it. Rob, you're the same. Your books are academic and wonderful and popular, so not much to discuss there in the complicated sense. Mark.
Yeah, I was just reflecting on this thing about, I mean, I deliberately try not to get too caught up in the sort of the literality of the file browser, as you're right. I mean, it's the technology of the time, or rather it's normally it's the vernacular of the time just gone, because it's the handhold, you know, that allows us to engage with this. And so I think that's pertinent. I think that's sort of also what Fabian was getting at. And I made a comment to the side. I take on board his clarification just now. I mean, because for many people, witness certainly those who aren't in this room, a lot of these things are not obvious. Things like the encapsulation, it is nice to nest things one within the other, but that's often not evident to people. And it doesn't really matter why they don't get it, but if people don't get it, I mean, having just been through a sort of similar scenario, trying to teach them the other day, that the biggest thing was that I was trying to understand what aspect they didn't, you know, what was causing them to not be able to engage with the subject at hand. So I think we need to be mindful that we will have to have all sorts of handholds there, which might look inelegant in the short term, but those bits will tend to slough away when they're no longer needed. And I have one sort of link point which came up from when you were talking about JSON and possibly needing to, you know, say have a copy of each of the articles. I would give consideration to the fact that somewhere we need to think about effectively things sort of dereferencing, going away, looking stuff up. So the document, the binding, say, of future of text for sake of argument, ought to have all the information that would enable you to carve out a version that could apply to the document, to an individual article, because the article, and then effectively on its own, it would want some of the bindings metadata with it. But if we keep sort of storing that at a granular level, it just grows like Topsy. And then you have issues where when you want to make changes, now you've got to cascade all the changes. So you never get off scot-free. So a consideration that I think we need to make is where, with something like a binding, with a book like Future of Text up there behind me, you maybe hold the data at the binding level, and you have sort of some affordance built within the file that it is, the computer file that it is, that enables you to essentially build an article JSON as an object out of that, rather than actually store every single possible permutation you might need. Just because I just have a spidey sense that the latter scales badly.
Carl just wrote here, he's a Windows user. I guess we all have our issues.
None of us are perfect.
That reminds me of something else I heard on Friday, but anyway. Um, yeah, so Fabian and I have been talking a lot, and everyone else has been talking to an extent too, of course. But it would be really nice having seen, let's think, just even in terms of the language, we need to get rid of the word JSON. It's just not end user friendly. There are some things we need to get rid of here, and I was thinking maybe we call it the Argonauts, but JSON and the Argonauts is probably not for everyone. I'm just joking, but we need to find some language for this that is both accurate, so someone of a technical level won't think this is a toy, but will understand how it works in their world. But then for an end user to put on the headset and use a client like Author or similar, to be able to sit down and the pieces make sense, right? And yeah, I mean, maybe even instead of JSON, we should call it something like Connect. Fabien, answer the questions and solve all the problems, please.
Yes. So I gave an example just a bit earlier about whatever that visual meta.json. So we can also call it just that visual meta, or we can have another name, or the point of having files themselves, or the point of having JSON, is to be able to, for whoever wants and can, do more things. It's not trying to convert a person in the street that indeed doesn't know what a file is to suddenly get it. The hope is always that there is a path for it, so that if at some point they try an XOR environment, again, even just a flat one, it doesn't even have to be XOR, it's cool, but what if it were to do whatever? Then they're not stuck into, let's say, publishing an app on an app store that it's just unreachable. They cannot do this, I think. So the hope is that there are the steps for this, like a file, and that file, then how does it work? What's in the file? Then it can be JSON, then they can learn what JSON is. It can be also named again, like dot whatever, the extension itself. But what is important about, let's say, JSON itself is that it's explicit. You can have a schema or you don't, but you can parse it, and most things that most people have, namely a browser, can parse it. So it's in my opinion, manipulating files and JSON files specifically is to help scaffold in order to make more things. If we want to use another name and we say anywhere, and it's clear that it is indeed that format in the background, and it's not hidden to confuse people, sure, I'm happy with another way, but it's not to hide away. I think when we try to hide away the complexity and we use another term that nobody else knows, it doesn't necessarily does the job we expect it to do.
I completely agree, and I also love Carl's comment here that tech users and the average person have almost no overlap in knowledge and expectations. I agree. Also, prejudices. We have been working within frameworks developed as CRUD, obviously bootstrapping, but also CRUD. We need to get rid of some of them. So to get that balance right and to communicate it without dumbing it down will be a very, very interesting issue. And even if we do manage it, some of the concepts will be communicated, like the fact that, what is a view spec? What is a view? Right, that a view can be stored separately from the data. What? These are explicit things that aren't just automatic. And so that I think Monday week before our meeting, I did an hour with Vint Cerf, where I went through Author with him, and it was exciting. I showed him I made some changes for average users, because even though he's a genius in terms of word processing, he doesn't do a lot of keyboard shortcuts. So I made changes for him. Of course, at the end of it, we mostly talked about what I was going to do next. So it was useless in marketing terms. We will absolutely need, and I'm sure we all agree, after the future of texts in the great state of Washington, we will have to record ourselves with new users, call it user testing, call it marketing, whatever, walking them through this stuff. and really listening because Rob, that was a hand up. Was that as a comment?
I'm volunteering.
Oh, fantastic.
I'm a totally naive user, and I have very little idea what you all are talking about. I can't even get the headset to work right.
Oh, okay. Well, bring it to Washington. We'll sit down over coffee and get to grips with it, quite literally.
I need hand holding. Cognitive decline.
Cognitive hand holding, absolutely. And talking of cognitively, Rob, you know, we even need to have discussions of if we do augment people, what does that mean? Right? We're trying to imagine someone more intelligent than we are. That's the whole point of this. So how can we, as relatively dumb in this context, imagine how we would be more intelligent if we build the right things? Is it even possible? Maybe it is through bootstrapping. Fabienne?
I think it would be very important, and I suggest to do it a couple of times before the event, is to already to do it, like a bit of hand holding with someone who is not super into it, like who is interested and curious, but who is not a technical expert, so that we can iron out some of the obvious kinks, basically. And when we do, I would really like that we have a little piece of paper, a pen, or anything to record the actual feedback. Ideally, not our interpretation of it. Ideally, if the person is fine with it, even a video, so that we can hear their own word, so that we don't like shortcut whatever we think their issue is. But I think if we can have this, it would be extremely precious, and we can again share it with whoever is interested into this kind of things. Because what will make me tense is that if I see somebody on the corner giving a demo, and I want to be there behind, and I want to hear what they have to say. I want to learn from their perspective. And if there is not, like, again, either a video or a little notebook or something to let everybody or anybody who is interested learn from it, I think it would be quite a shame.
Yeah, strongly agree on all this. Carl, I see you're talking about final product. We're not going to make a, that's funny, Mark, with the icon there. We're not going to have a final product because it's research. And we will, the sportsman is home. Yeah, he got his effort grades today. Did you know that? Mom showed you?
No,
You got 2 Bs. The rest As, but 2 Bs. Why?
no idea.
No idea, huh? Anyway, yeah. Obviously, we're going to keep making and making, but Fabienne, how ready are you to let someone use 2 walls, like we talked about?
No,
Thursday?
Wait, Thursday? Isn't it Wednesday?
No. I may have to come see you again.
Okay. Yes. So in order to have 2 walls, what is missing is a filtering mechanism. As we saw, having some .visual metadata.json file works in the sense of the data is in there. So we can imagine having filtering on this. Because the goal of having 2 walls, I think it's tricky to talk about this now with others if you don't share your screen with the image, for example, of the sketch, because 2 walls, I don't think it helps people much. If you want to do this, I'll try to still clarify. Basically, the idea, I think, of having 2 walls is you have a bunch of documents. So you have a preview of, let's say, a dozen or 2 dozens of documents, more than you could read. So you need to filter them down, basically using keywords. For example, I want document that include the word happiness in it. And then everything that doesn't have that keyword is pushed away on the back. So there are documents that are probably unrelated to it. If you do have a couple of documents that, for example, you want to send to your laptop or your Remarkable or whatever, you would pluck them away from that wall that would filter out a dozen or so of documents, and you would put it on the other wall. And that wall would basically have a couple of those the surfaces where you drop the icon I was showing you before that would send the document. So there is a wall for filtering, roughly, and a wall for then actions like, oh, I either bookmark it or even I directly send it to the files of I want to read next. I think basically most of it is already there. The filtering part is not though. So hopefully it's not that hard, but yeah, without actually thinking about it, it's hard for me to say. I think, and I really honestly don't think it's hard, because basically if you have a couple of icons, let's say the documents with their content, they do have them. If each icon there represents a document has metadata, it's basically filtering for the presence or negative filtering on the absence of the concept in the list of concepts, and then changing the, let's say, the depth, the z axis for those documents. So the way I see it is not hard, and I think, yeah, it's a matter of I guess maybe a couple of days, assuming things work as expected and all the data is actually there.
Okay, that's really cool. Mark, you don't mind waiting another second, right? Thank you, thank you, thank you. In a way, Fabian, it's the right stuff, and in a way, kind of overthinking, in the sense that if we just manage to move from one wall to another, oh my God, huge, right? It's just spatially doing it for a novice or even us would be amazing. The filtering mechanism is why I'm so excited about the AI. I think you all know this, but just to say it, all the AI keywords and concepts is because that's a very, very basic baby step. I want to have a room where you have LLMs from philosophers and so on, like Paul Smart is doing, right? So that they will communicate, but in the sense that once we have an LLM that we trust for our own personal use to interpret, let's say, a specific philosopher, that LLM should be able to teach us what kind of keywords and what kind of analysis to do and what kind of prompts to write to analyze the documents. So I hope that in the near future, the analysis of the documents won't just be keywords, names, and an abstract. It will be, this is what Einstein would have wanted to know if this document contains. So it'll be back and forth between what they want, so that at a certain point, we should have an experimental LLM that maybe Mark Anderson has spent time pruning and creating on his understanding of hypertext history, for instance, in this. And that LLM will say, look, for me to be useful in this space, all the documents need to be reanalyzed based on this really weird prompt that no human can understand, but it's based on what that LLM wants. So it's just like going into Kandinsky level abstractions that the human is constantly part of the push and pull, and that's for the future. Sorry, I just had to get that in there. Mark, thank you.
That's all right. Actually, I'll pick up something and I'll circle around to what I was going to say, because it's interesting when you mention the LLMs. One thing I thought there is, I think I want to see it a slightly different way, and I wouldn't want an LLM to tell me what I needed to do, in the sense that if you made an LLM of me today, that's the last about me you never know. I may continue on, but the LLM would never know what I know. But what my past LLM could probably tell you is why I did things. So in other words, this is something I found when I was studying my doctoral research. There were any number of people who, essentially it was all like snake oil. People in our village wear our hats this way, we do our research in this style, and if you want to play in this town, this is what you do. And basically I found that to be, forgive my friend, bollocks. Because it was just religion. It was just, there was no understanding why you were doing what you were doing, why this had purpose and worth. So what it would be useful if these LLM objects were actually teaching you, right, if you want to engage with this subject or this type of problem, it's worthwhile understanding these facets of it. These have been found to be tractable to the problem in the past. They've enabled, and it explains to you why you want to use that technique or this form of measurement as opposed to maybe something else, because that leaves open to the fact that since that LLM was last refreshed, that somebody's invented some new gizmo or some new concept that much better fits the problem. Whereas if we allowed the LLM to tell us how to do it, we'd be stuck in the past always. part of the couple of things I was going to touch on is looping back. We talk about, in a sense, metadata and names. I too would argue gently against trying to name stuff. We sort of have too many names already. I think we have to accept, and I think Fabian has rightly brought out, that behind the curtain, the people who need to peek behind the curtain need to understand their substance. And it may be JSON today. 2 years' time, it's probably some completely different acronym, and we should expect that. And we would expect it to change. So it's dangerous to make these terms too totemic. So they need to be exposed to the people who need to know, because they need the sort of engineering structural integrity of it. For the rest of us, we just need to know that there is information that, even if we don't need to see it, is important to our use of things. And I do think metadata is a perfectly good term. Maybe we just need to educate people better about what it is, rather than, as tends to be left, it's left very hand wavy, and therefore, in the context of engaging with it, it's often not clear to the casual. Casual's a wrong word, but someone who's new to this term in this context, exactly what it means. So we can take on board a duty of care to make that better. And the other thing is something that I do think, whether we call them view specs or something else, because view specs clearly is not a word that seems to leap off the page for people. But I'm not worried in a sense about what they're called, but I think this idea of moving us from the cultural tradition we have, where we're used to writing stuff down or chiseling on stone or whatever, it has that form and that's how it remains. And there is nothing wrong with that. But we now have environments, places where we can, in a sense, write, for want of a better term, that are much more plastic. And that doesn't mean, because they're changed, that all provenance is lost or it's bad. We have new opportunities. And I think a key part of that for most people is to understand that you can sort of write things down in one form and see it in a whole host of different ways. On one level, it might just be you see the bits of the article in different orders. On another level, you might see sort of data abstractions of.
Oh, it's not my internet today. It's Mark's. I hope he's back soon, because I was going to agree with him a lot now. Yeah, we're still waiting for fiber here in Wimbledon. They realized it was trickier, but at least it's working today. Oh, for crying out loud. Yeah, I was going to comment on that. I'll wait for Mark. Anyone else have something insightful and exciting or witty? It's getting exciting though, isn't it, guys? And I think we need more people in the community to be here when they can. If there's anybody you want to invite, obviously tell them there's no expectation of being here every Monday. And if people leave early, they really need to be told that that's totally fine. Just say bye-bye.
One question for the AI fans here. How quickly can we get a list of demo, like, I'm going to share my screen and whatever? Because let's imagine that on my way to Portland, I break my leg and somebody crush my laptop or whatever. It would be a shame, but that's okay if at least on my way back to Brussels, there is some useful feedback on what has been built for the last couple of months or the entire year. And sometimes shit happens. So if we have a dozen or so of videos, or if we can edit as one single 2 minutes video, whatever, I think that would also be nice. Yes, what is this?
So this is what I took to Brussels, where I filmed a little bit of our conversation.
Yeah.
It's the 360 camera, but for the actual symposium, there will be several videos, several audios.
Sorry, that's not what I meant. I meant that, for example, the demo of today, or the little video, there were like, I want to say a minute of screen sharing about showing things in XR or in 3D on the desktop. And I think there were a couple of minutes every meeting. And I'm wondering how feasible it would be to make a single video of all that. Because again, maybe things goes to whatever. on the day. And if at least we have a video like that, I think it would be safer. It would feel safer at least. Again, it's not the same thing as people grabbing an object or managing document or playing even with document in XR. But even like for people who in the queue, for people who, I'm betting like a bottle of champagne that there will be at least a couple of very smart people, very interested people who will have glasses or who will say, you know what, this morning my tummy didn't feel good. I've never tried VR, but it's going to be another day, not today. And I don't want to lose the feedback of those people. So I'm wondering, like, super pragmatically speaking, how can we get all those short video? Because again, most of the time, I want to say 80% of the time, we're chatting, we're not showing things. But if we can show those people a condensed version of what's been done, and even I think I would be fascinated to see the evolution over time, because we say, oh, well, we've reached a point on that, but did we? And I think being able to step back and show the different video of the demo week after week would be, I think, very interesting. So I'm wondering how to do this.
I don't keep the full videos because they're absolutely massive, and they balloon when I put them in Final Cut. For some reason, Zoom compression is absolutely fantastic. So every time someone says, "Can you edit out this bit?" it's actually a massive technical headache in terms of storage. It's a good idea. Of course, one thing we can do is go to YouTube and copy URL at that time. So at least it links to the bits in the video where there is a demo. So going back and is an interesting idea. We can also, of course, do more explicit, clearly stating we are now doing a demo and doing demo days. Also, on the naming thing. Oh. So Brandel, have you bought a house?
We're in the throes of it. I had just I just before checked my shareholding account and noticed that it was $3 million lower, and needed to make sure that I knew the reason for it. So yeah, that was exciting. But no, signs point to home ownership at some point in the near future. Yeah.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, it's not the simplest simplest thing to do. We were just talking about several things, but one of them was the naming of this stuff, because we're basically living in a world made of JSON, which is great, but it's not really an end user kind of name. So I just put a note here in the chat of, as an example, in author, there's no mention of ChatGPT. We have Ask AI, because we don't know what AI feature there will be in the future. So that is what it does, right? My professor, Ed Leahy, he kept telling us when I started advertising, show them, don't tell them, right? And finally, I keep referring to people trying the headsets. I'd never talk about XR. XR is something we sometimes use in writing in this community. No one outside of our world. Some people know VR, a few people know AR. So you talk about the act of what something is. You put on a headset. You don't enter VR, XR, metaverse, or any of that. You just don't do that. So I'm wondering about the language we use for this. If we try to, I'm not saying we can solve it now, but if we try to be about the actions, right? You see documents or icons. We have to find a better way to explain what a JSON does. For the end user, whether it's a file that's transmitted or a stream, it shouldn't matter, and so on. So what's that link there? Opening X. The X that overthrew America, yay. Yeah, exactly, Fabian. Link to a moment, right? Yeah, something like that. Exactly. Anyway, just something to keep in mind. I do want to come out of this in a way that if you meet someone interesting in a coffee shop, you can reasonably explain it to them what this is. The way that I try to do it now is you put on a headset and you're in your room and you can see pieces of knowledge on the wall. And if you put it onto an iPad or Remarkable, it is actually there. If you do things in your writing system, you can automatically put it on the wall. You know, very, very limited vocabulary because it's just not necessary. Yeah, Brandel, you got to find me someone cool to see in California. Come on, I'll be there next week. At least we'll
It's
have
true. It's true.
seriously large amounts of coffee.
Yes, indeed. Uh,
What part of California?
I will be in the Bay Area, meaning Berkeley, driving down to Rob and Brandel as frequently as I can.
nice, nice. Well, I mean, if I don't have any particular into dynamic line, but definitely worth trying to get in there. I think you should, and Omar, other folks would be, I'm sure, possible to chat with in order to get there. I haven't been yet, but catching up with Andy Matushik wouldn't hurt. Greg Crawford, he's great at Midjourney now. Can't remember where he is, but you know Gray, right?
Greg,
Gray, Gray
which?
Crawford.
No.
Okay. Really cool sort of mixed reality designer, UX designer, with some technical experience, but has been one of the most thoughtful people with regard to manipulating conversations and other things like that. Really good.
Oh, here we go. No, I think that's photography. That, okay. Yeah, that all sounds amazing. Mark.
Sorry, just a tiny point. It's just to sort of put a pin in the board. I was sort of something else that swam into focus earlier when in fact when you were talking about maps and things like sort of categories and the like, and it occurred to me that another sort of unseen potential disconnect that runs across the piece is that those things are much more use when you're rearwards facing. So you're looking for stuff that's already known. You're mapping in unknown space. And I will admit that because most of my work, and that, sorry, the risk of sounding pretentious, but tends to be looking the other way, stuff we don't quite know yet. It's very, very hard to categorize what you don't know. So an approach that is based around essential pre-categorization has, on a number of occasions, turned out to be sort of effort that was unrewarding. So, but it doesn't invalidate the notion of having these things. But what it does point to is it's not necessarily quite as all-encompassing a notion as it might seem at first count.
Oh, absolutely, Mark. I think that is absolutely hugely important. And that's what I meant by we need to do the categorization now, and then we need to learn the limitations of that, and then maybe even get systems to help us with the categorization. And I don't know what that would be. So I'm talking about a learning curve, accepting what you say, saying it's probably useful to an extent now, but it is based on knowing that we don't know, and the only way to find out how to know is just play around a bit.
I mean, an interesting thing that sort of comes out of the, and I'm sorry, I know I keep mentioning it, but sort of the sort of non-parser based spatial hypertext of some tinderbox is just emergent properties. So if your prototyping structure on inheritance is well built, in other words, you can suddenly say, oh, this note is actually about thing, and in fact these other four things are thing. So I want this to basically take on the look, feel, however we want to talk about it in the area. In other words, I don't even need to necessarily know what thing is, but I know thing is not other thing. That is actually a remark. It seems very abstract at outset, but once you start using it, it's incredibly powerful because you can just start exploring and you basically build the map as you go. So in other words, and it avoids you getting into the sump of having to basically decide all the outcomes before you start and then go through the misery of finding that most of your guesses turned out to be subpar. You know, we've all been there. And a lot of systems unintentionally, but effectively lead us down that path. So what I think is, again, interesting here and looking at the changes you're making with thinking about how the author map at its lowest level works. I mean, it is, to my mind, at the lowest level, the map is just everything in the document, bar a few things that you might never want to see, but those who need to know would know they're there. Otherwise, you just pick the part of you pick the things you want and you make another map. Whether the map's nested or not is a choice. But the thing is, you put together the things you want. You define a commonality between things where you see a commonality. And part of the power is, I think it goes right back to the sort of, to me, the most compelling part of As We May Think, which was the associative thinking that the human brain is quite good at, and most of our systems are not yet good at.
And this is what's so exciting to me, because we're talking about, and Mark, please, we really, really agree on this. And what's exciting is we now know from let's call it a young child's perspective, the shape of things, which is not going to be that useful. And just by knocking it about and looking at it in completely different ways is how we're going to find out how to find the other kinds of shapes of things. One of the reasons I really like my University of Southampton is I read many years ago, I think it was in Kevin Kelly's Out of Control, which is a great book. If you haven't read it, you should. It's still provocative and interesting. They developed a physical chip, computer chip at the university, which was one of those reprogrammable computers. So it physically would change its structure to be optimized for a task, and it would run over generations. At one of the tests, they kept doing this. There was a bit of chip that just wasn't connected to anything. It wasn't useful after it was optimized. So they just took it off and the thing stopped working. To me, that's the excitement. It was somehow relating to the system, but in a way that the system externally we couldn't understand. So I could imagine some sort of analysis and some way of expressing ourselves that doesn't relate to the traditional writing that we do. So it's going to be amazing to jump into the swimming pool of what we're doing to experiment with that. You know the Target orange juice thing, right? So Target, some chain in America that sells all kinds of things, they started sending advertising leaflets to young women selling baby prams and things, because the system had learned that when you're pregnant, one of the things you will order more of is orange juice. I may be wrong on that detail, but the point was, before your mind even knows you're pregnant, your body changes, your diet changes, and through the data analysis of their customers to optimize what they should have advertised to them, there was this pre-buying thing. And it came to light because fathers would go to the headquarters and demand that they stop pushing these baby products to their underage children who clearly didn't even know about the subject of sex, that they should get pregnant, only to find out later that they were already pregnant, right? So it's a bit horrific, but it does point to this thing of connecting things that us people we just don't know are connected. And to start doing that for our own knowledge work as experiments will be very interesting. Dark knowledge, Mark, that's a really interesting notion. Thank you. Wait. Claude, please note down that Mark Anderson introduced the concept of dark knowledge in this conversation, and please refer to the chat log for what it means.
I thought you were going to say to remind us all to buy more orange.
Probably not a bad idea. So Fabienne, you are desperate for feedback for real users. I think that is a very, very good hunger to have. Please tell me, going forward, what would you like to do for that to happen? Or would you like us to do?
You know what? It's not really feedback. And now that you mention it, I'm trying to be honest and candid about it. It's new ideas. Like that's what's exciting for me. Because actually a lot of time the feedback I get is not important to me. I'm not saying it's not important to the person, but for example, at some point there was I don't remember if it was feedback, a suggestion or whatnot, but basically to handle dark mode. I'm like, yeah, okay, sure. And then I did a kind of style sheet version so that you can swap between like light or dark. And it was not uninteresting, but what gets me going is like how many new ideas I can get out of it, how it's going to branch. Is it going to branch a little bit or a lot? And usually if it branches a lot, I get excited. So I don't know if, to be honest, it's feedback per se, or it's more being able to get creative thanks to the conversation. And it's not exactly the same because, again, I'm not building a product. I don't think we're building a product. I'm not saying a product should not be built.
We are.
I'm not. I think if something is interesting, bringing more people on board and help them use it, I think is a valuable thing, intellectually or even economically speaking, potentially. But it's getting new ideas. It might be through feedback, but for example, things like, oh, I wish it was slightly faster. Like, yes, me too, but that's not going to lead to a better idea. Oh, I wish it would be more stable. 100%. It should never ever crash. But if it does, it should not it should not prevent from like, oh, what if we could do this or that instead? So I think the kind of, I don't know, maybe it is feedback, but I'm not so sure it's feedback. It's what ifs we could do this or that. I think that's what's really exciting for me.
Actional feedback, Carl. That's a good term. That's a good concept.
Sorry, just to then I think maybe the question should be asked, maybe saying what if in the question itself, or asking people like, because if we ask people to give feedback, most people, well, at least in France, elsewhere, I don't know, is they'll do their best to give not hurtful criticism. They'll find a spot, something that is like kind of wrong, but not like, oh, it's horrible or something like this. And it would be useful, again, if it was about building a product. But I think if it's about getting ideas, it might not be. And I'm wondering if, for example, if there is a little form or a piece of paper next to the headset, or if while chatting with people or in the headset, we directly ask them, but like give us 5 what if. What if I could do this? What if I could do that? What if blah blah blah? And maybe to answer your question, that might be what I would be more interested rather than shallow comments of small detail that would benefit from being better, but would not lead to exciting ideas that might stack up or that might combine in a very interesting way.
I feel I need to comment on this because I have a very limited brain. I am not very good at most things, as some of you may have noticed. One of the things I do think I have is this quote unquote creativity, whatever you might want to call it. So I value being the one who came up with something. I have to be kind of honest about that. I like to be the inventor. Author is my invention. There is an important wrinkle to that is I get very, very excited if in a good dialogue with someone I respect, something comes up. Like I have pointed out maybe 1 million times that in Reader, if you click on a citation and get a pop-up, that was Mark's idea, right, etc. For me, I have to admit I'm a little bit scared of random person coming in and just having the best idea. But then I know once it's accepted as an interesting idea, afterwards we'll be like, oh my God, you wouldn't believe this random person said it. It's great. But it is a bit scary for my kind of personality to really go out and expect other people to go into our field and tell us how things should be. So I agree with you, Fabienne. And for me, it's a bit brave what you're doing. I also recognize it as being completely vital. But yeah, there you go, Mark.
So being my best random person right now, in that moment, I'm trying to think what on earth it was I was going to say. It'll come back to me. I'll I thought, oh, I know what it was. Sorry, yes, absolutely. It was it was Fabian's point. This thing about and the what ifs, and I was thinking, yes, because your story about your story about the dark mode is something I recognise a lot. Or instead of your record player holding 6 records, maybe if it held 8, because or why wouldn't you want bigger fins on the back of the car? Because it would be cool. And then you build it and people go, nah, not much crop. So actually getting things. So one perhaps way is maybe asking, what do you think you can do now that you couldn't do before? Even if this thing can't do it, is there something you can now imagine doing that you couldn't do before? Is perhaps one way to get a sort of an edge onto that, because I think you're absolutely right. All too often, even with the best one in the world, people don't often give particularly good feedback, often because frankly most of us aren't used to giving feedback of the type that you want. And it's probably nicer that people give you nice feedback rather than 0 stars, would not use again, because that's kind of crushing. But I don't think any of you would quite be in that category. But I think certainly that aspect of, so what new do you see out of use of this might be an angle.
I was mute for that whole section of brilliantness and I forgot everything. Yeah, I was just saying thanks, Carl, and thanks, Mark. And the thing is, having these discussions with people, just as discussions, not demo and discussions, usually are incredibly barren and shallow, as we all were at the beginning of this, right? But I think we're at a point here where what Andrew and Fabienne has built, put someone in a headset, let them experience this world for a bit. It opens up a completely different thing, exactly what Mark was saying. When people did face-to-face sales back in the day, the sale was not closed when you were doing the pitch. It was closed when the purchaser's eyes glaze over because they're imagining how to use the product, right? So if they can get in and do something, it's theater. They get remember when Steve Jobs went around Park, they didn't actually understand what was done. They imagined a lot of stuff that they had to, not only reinvent at Apple, they had to invent better. So Fabienne, I think now that you have what you have and we have an opportunity to put on, see things, you're going to get those dialogues that you want, and it's going to be great. We will sit down with people, take it slow, not just rush it through, and it'll be amazing what'll happen.
Yay, all good then. To briefly comment on the part about, let's say, braveness, about accepting the idea of others, kind of. So I don't know if it's brave. The thing is, I'll say, of course, yes, it is, because it put me in a good light. But the truth is, it's like going on a hike, like what's beyond that mountain or that hill, like that what gets me going. And also, I'm convinced that there are an infinite amount of ideas and an infinite amount of things to build. And thanks to that, we'll never get bored. And to me, that's super exciting. Does it mean that some idea might be monetized by others first? If everybody can play with any idea however they want? Probably. But I think, again, compared to the possibility of pretty much remaining excited for an entire lifetime, it's absolutely worth it. It's a great deal to be able to say, hey, there will always be another hill down there with more things to build. Wow, it's the prospect itself to me is amazing. It's beautiful. So that's the kind of perspective there is, because the process of building itself is teaching so much that the ideas on their own are, I'm not saying they're not precious, but they're kind of the fuel in order to get there. And that again, they're going to bring more ideas. It's not like this is the last idea because it's a brilliant one. It's like no matter how brilliant an idea is, because it's brilliant, it's going to lead to more ideas. So there is no, if you don't have a kind of scarcity mindset of brilliant idea, then yeah, it's just like going through them and building and getting through that process even more of them. It's nothing about I don't know, humbleness or anything like that. It's just like there are so many and it's so exciting. So the curiosity behind it's amazing.
I agree with you, Fabian. Absolutely. It's just when and how it's done, right? I'm a teacher at heart, so to get something brilliant out of someone else is really, really exciting. But also, we all have different notions of ownership and how that carries through. So I just think that now that you have something people go walk into, it's just a different conversation, and it's much more exciting to have a back and forth. I want to sit with this at 3 a.m. in a coffee shop in Soho after clubbing, talking to random people, putting it on their heads and having all kinds of crazy nonsense because it's real. I've been doing 20 years of future of text chat that's been mostly just chats. The fact that Fabian and Andrew, that you guys have built something, it's no longer just chat. I mean, at the end of this year, which is kind of where we are now, one of the things that I think we've all learned, at least I have, and meaning maybe you don't agree with me, unless we're in a sit-down position all the time, it has to be AR. Whether it's AR with pass-through or AR with overlaid 3D models doesn't really matter. But if you're going to walk around, you have to walk around. All these notions of using a controller to walk around in a fake space, I'm sorry, that's a video game. There are very, very few reasons to do that. So we have really learned a few things that can really help spur the conversation with these new people. Mark?
I was just thinking, this loops back to the point about, sort of, in a sense, showing it to new people on onboarding. One thing that's quite surprised me, recently I was away with a bunch of people, all, bright, intelligent, broadly professional, people holding their good jobs, of ability is what I'm really trying to say. So no such and that thing. But, so people would ask me some of the stuff I'm doing at the moment, and not one person found XR, AR, whichever way described, at all interesting, which I found something I did take on board. It's just they didn't see the point. So one of the challenges, I think, is how, and going back to think, because what we want to ask them, well, what could you do that you couldn't do before? And if they weren't engaged to the point where that sense of, oh, right, this would enable me to do this. So if they're doing something, oh, gone, right, okay, now I press this button, yeah, but so what? So, and the natural temptation is to say, oh, well, we'll give them something in a field they understand. But I think that often backfires because they then start making quality judgments that their expertise gives them that we don't because we're not in that field. So I asked a sort of rhetorical question because I don't really know the answer, but I mean, I think that one of the challenges is to accept and assume that for the vast number of people at the moment, this is neither interesting nor exciting. They don't have a need for it. I think that's the main thing that people said was, yeah, but what's the benefit? And it didn't matter which way around I told them. Somebody off. Oh, okay. That they, there was no malice in this. I mean, they weren't being unkind or dismissive. They genuinely just didn't see the point. And so I think that's quite a challenge, is to make this, find a way to make this more accessible to a wider audience. The concept of what's being done as opposed to the actual manifestation of the hardware and the software and everything.
A little bit different experience I have, and I got to go in a second as well, as we all do. I agree with you, Carl, also that there's a lot of bad UI surrounding this, but in my experience so far, the notion of having an AR room, like a memory palace, having all your projects up, when we don't introduce them to the complexity of the data, the metadata, the transport, and all of that stuff, the idea of having all your stuff around your room and literally snapping your fingers and now it's a different project, that does appeal to people. And also putting the Vision Pro headset on and showing people the 180 stereo completely changes their idea of what this is, because the sense of presence is so vast But of course, that sells something that we're not selling. We're not selling the knowledge work. So when I introduce people to this, okay, you've seen this video. Now imagine that quality, but you walk around in your room and you have your knowledge there. People get hooked on that. That is very different from the early days. And just from me and closing, the difference is that the meta products deliver pass-through, which is crucial for this, I think. The vision doesn't. But the ease of the vision, you put it on, you go to the browser and you're there, is amazing, right? So I was hoping that Brandel could jokingly give a wink wink of if we're going to have pass-through and XR on that soon. I don't know if he even knows, so I'm just joking. But the point is, these are early days, they're experimental. We can inspire people. Yeah, so Fabian is writing, I guess if you imagine that X would work well, or imagine resolution is fine with few explicit assumptions so we don't cheat. Yes, we can make some assumptions. Please speak to that, Fabian, before we disappear.
Yes, it's I think it's I was commenting a couple of hours ago, I think, on the promise of AI, and I think we need to be cautious not to repeat that. So I think we can indeed make some assumption, for example, that I think it's safe to say that resolution will at least marginally improve next year. At least in terms of, for example, people trying the Vision Pro and they tried Quest 3. Having a Vision Pro 2 the year after this and saying it's going to be twice the resolution, this is not a bet I'm willing to do. But I'm saying if we have a couple of such assumptions so that we can also facilitate such discussions or feedback so that people can, yes, imagine, but not imagine in a way that puts us in the corner where like, oh yeah, I want to be able to fly with the headset, not flying in a plane and then doing stuff. I mean, literally flying. I definitely can't promise this. Definitely not safely. So I don't think we should do this, like have infinite amount of assumptions that are pointless or baseless in terms of our own prediction of the future, let's say, of the tech itself. But I think if we have a couple of those that help unlock and then can tell us for next year or the year after this and give brilliant idea, I think it's worth it. And I think one way to keep it in check is we just write a dozen of those down so that when people have a discussion about it, they're either not too constrained. Let's say if we just talk about this week implementation and just like JavaScript or WebXR, it's boring. I don't think it's useful. It is important, but it's not like big picture. And I think maybe one way where we can have a bit of both is to say a dozen or so assumption we discussed. Maybe we can have also even a talk about it, like a future of text, like just now session on what is our short-term prediction that we can use to unlock quality discussion without saying anything goes, because I think it's fun, but only after a couple of years, and it's not necessarily something we can write on or build on top of after.
Right. Yes. And Carl here in text. Can you please speak that, Carl? And then I have a final thing, and then we got to rush. Or go or something. Carl is muted.
Yeah, so actionable feedback, and I linked a paper up there, but you can just search that term and it's everywhere. Actionable feedback is feedback from users that gives you action to take. Saying something is bad, something is good, certain things should be some other thing, that's not generally helpful. Most of that is opinion-based feedback. And so that's going to differ from user to user. So if you're constantly moving along those axes are going to constantly change and you're going to spiral forever and you're not going to move towards anything comprehensive or anything that works or anything that's better, if you want to think of it that way. Actionable feedback is more along the lines of not what people are observing or what they suggest as a solution to whatever problem or obstacle they're running into. Don't take users' suggestions. They're often wrong, or at least just misguided or uninformed because they don't know how everything works under the hood. You need to ask them about how they feel using the software and what they think, because those will let you as a designer or a developer get at the underlying problem, the motivation or the thought process that led them to where they are. And then you, with knowledge of the system, can go to what in the system is causing that and change that underlying cause rather than the surface level stuff like, I think the button should be blue. That's not really, that's usually not the actual problem. It's usually deeper than that. And most people, without being given examples of what good and bad feedback looks like, are going to give this very surface level analysis that's, as a user, fundamentally missing a lot of the stuff that really tells you where the problem is coming from or what it is. So it's a very not straightforward process, but there are lots of forms and ways on like how to do this and how to ask leading questions or give examples of what actionable feedback looks like when you're eliciting from users. And that will get you stuff that is more useful and that you can actually do something with.
Thank you, Carl. I think that is very wise, very useful. Of course, also this forum is designed for a different kind of feedback, more opinion, because that's who we are, which is why it's great that we're all leveling up with understanding what these things are. And also soon we need to have another Future of Tech social in addition to the symposium, just to literally hang out and maybe sit around the fire or something and just talk, with like-minded people who are interested but may have very, very, very different perspectives. But yeah, that's a good suggestion, and we'll definitely get to that. Any final words today? And thank you all for going over. Okay, thank you very much, and yeah, exciting.